So documentary editor, a structured presentation with dramatic impact of an event, individual, or situation of current cultural and or historical significance, or a creative in-depth treatment of a topic presented in factual and informative manner can be edited by one person or a team. Must have debuted during the contest year. All lengths are greater than 10 minutes. Higher weights will be given to documentaries with stellar editing and editing choices. An example, music, graphics, effects, and pacing. That graphics and pacing that elevated the presentation without distracting from the story. Mandatory write-up for this category. You must notify judges of all elements you did not produce. An example, music, graphics, and effects. Students, is there any write-ups for this one before we watch this entry? I guess it would be in the descriptor panel on the right. None? Okay. All right, and here's the first entry.
General Order Number 3, the Juneteenth order.
The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between an employer and hired labor.
You can imagine the burden lifted from these people, the men, the women, the children that knew that they were chattel, property, and now understanding that they were free. But the question that was lingering was, what did freedom look like?
The slaves built this country.
They had a sense of who they were. They very quickly built a sense of community.
To what degree have we actually achieved the absolute freedom that Juneteenth promised?
Ignoring these painful histories doesn't mean that they don't still influence us.
We stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and we need to honor their memory by telling their story.
Juneteenth, 1865 to 2021.
Galveston, Texas, a place known for tourism and quick getaways. But it's the history which happened here that impacts us all today.
African slaves were brought here on ships in the 1800s. But even after the slave trade ended, slavery here did not.
It was 1865, June 19th, now known as Juneteenth, when Union soldiers arrived and told slaves they were free.
It came 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln announced slavery had ended in the United States.
And we should remember this important date, June 19, 1865, represents the evolution of our country to a more perfect union. We were not perfect in 1528, 1619, 1776, 1865, or even the day in 2021, but we're moving, hopefully, to a more perfect union.
Juneteenth is directly related to the history of the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people in the Confederacy. Juneteenth is important for Texas because that is when enslaved Texans learned they were free and that the Confederacy had fallen.
So we're standing in the 2200 block of the Strand Historic District in Galveston. This was the heart of the commercial district, and at one time
Was the largest city in Texas.
the largest enslaver also lived here in Galveston. They owned 7 plantations, 4 in Brazoria County, 2 in Matagorda County, and 1 in Fort Bend.
Texas was this safe haven for slavery. They did what they call the running of the slaves. That was basically moving their slaves to Texas because there was no Union presence in Texas.
When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he knew that that would not immediately end slavery, and it didn't. And the reason is fairly simple. The Confederate States of America had formed its own country. They elected their own president. Confederate states printed their own money, which is why the Confederacy and the United States went to war. The United States' goal at the beginning of the war was just to restore the Union. The first war goal was not to emancipate the enslaved population.
And there were all these myths and stories about what happened and why it took 2.5 years for the word to reach Texas. Plantation owners in Texas were well aware of the Emancipation Proclamation, but they ignored it. What they cared about was maintaining the agrarian economy in Texas, and that was solidly based on cotton. And to maintain that, they needed slave labor. General Gordon Granger was on his way to Texas. Most of the Texas authorities had a pretty good idea what he was coming to Texas to do. Granger was in Texas for about a month. He sent his troops.
There were white soldiers and black soldiers.
Plantation to plantation, making the announcement.
Those black soldiers are people who especially helped shift the Union war goals from a war to restore the Union into a war of emancipation. It was personal for them.
They went over to the old Custom House on 20th Street to the Courthouse Square, from the Courthouse Square to the Colored Church on Broadway, which was Reedy Chapel.
Some of the dock workers were among the first to get the word, and so the celebrations began.
Give us a sense of what it must have been like for slaves on Juneteenth when they heard that message.
You know, that was something that was almost like going to heaven.
The celebrations, just to be so excited to taste that freedom.
The initial celebrations, there would be prayer services looking back at our journey in this country and what we had to endure in bondage. And the people who never lived to see that day. I think it's inescapable not to remember those people. Transatlantic voyage, the Middle Passage, people jumping off ships to avoid the treatment that they would have to endure.
You know, and old Marshall didn't tell you, it was free.
He didn't tell you that?
No, he didn't tell you. I think now they said it wait them 6 months out of that, 6 months, and turn them loose on the 19th of June. That's why, they celebrate that day, colored folks. Celebrate that day.
One of the quotes that I'm most fond of is from a former slave named Felix Haywood. Slavery could make you free, but it couldn't make you rich, because a lot of slaves thought that now that they were free, they would be rich, just like the white man.
You think about the elation, the trepidation of enslaved people not knowing what their future holds and being enslaved and bondage being lifted from their backs.
And there was one narrative about one slave who got the word, and his sister said, brother gave a whoop and ran away, and I never saw him again.
Was the South ready to free slaves? No, we know that.
Even though the order indicated the enslaved were free, if you look at the last sentence, it gives some instructions of what they can or cannot do.
The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
When you're told you're free, you're thinking that, oh, I can live my life. But it wasn't like that.
On one hand, you were free by name, but the actual reality of freedom, you were not fully experiencing it.
There were a lot of very frightened former slaves, and a lot of them stayed on the plantation.
They laid the bricks in the downtown area here where we stand on many of these buildings. Not only laid the bricks, but made the bricks.
Just off Galveston's bustling Broadway Street is Ashton Villa, built in 1859 by James Monroe Brown, a loyalist to the Confederacy, dubbed an honorary colonel. Brown was also a wealthy banker, architect, and mason who designed what's believed to be Texas' first all-brick house, a palace with bricks, all laid by slaves.
Anywhere you read, they will tell you that, slaves did all the work for this. They had to follow what the contractor was either telling them or showing them in order to do it. And look at this place. It's beautiful.
All of the intricacies and the detail that still stand today. It's amazing.
1859, one of the few buildings that withstood the 1900 storm.
Ashton Villa was saved from demolition in 1970. The historic home, now an event space, is operated by the Galveston Historical Foundation and home to the island's annual Juneteenth celebration.
They could leave the farm, they could leave the plantation, and they did, because so many emancipated people no longer wanted to work in agriculture because it reminded them of enslavement. For many people, the draw was labor, the opportunity to earn wages.
Working to pay off debt. The debts were never paid off. There were a lot of things that still kept the free people
suppressed.
And that's why a group of them ended up in your hometown, in Houston. So they marched to Houston.
The Black population of Houston boomed. They began to build homes in the part of Houston known as 4th Ward. Houston was divided into 6 different wards at the time. And so the land in that area of 4th Ward happened to be very low and flood prone. It wasn't land that was coveted by white Houstonians at the time.
When you look at the bricks of Freedmanstown, that brick is a symbol of foundation. That brick was a symbol of hope. The brick was theirs. They made the brick, they formed the brick, shaped the brick, they laid the brick. They stood on the brick.
Iconic housing of Freedmanstown was the shotgun house. There was a door in the front and then a door in the back. And people would joke that if you shot a gun, the bullet would travel all the way through without hitting anything.
The legendary Jack Yates, this is the land where he lived, and right next door to him was his son, the printer Rutherford B.H. Yates. The first time I walked along these bricks, I was very emotional. This is where my people decided that they would survive. These are 8-pound bricks that were double baked. And the significance of these bricks is that it has that beautiful red color of the clay that was here. And the fact that they are still here today is a testament to their strength, a testament to their craftsmanship and their skill.
No, these are original. I reside here in Freedmanstown. I was born in Freedmanstown, probably conceived in Freedmanstown. And this is a home that has been passed down through our family. I'm like the 5th generation. And the family operated a ice business and just drove through the community selling blocks of ice.
They did their best to gain property and to support their communities.
The wards in Houston functioned a little bit like small towns. 3rd Ward develops a Black community. 5th Ward develops one early. The Black community of 3rd Ward begins to develop around what we today call Emancipation Avenue, but that back then was Dowling Street, which was actually the name of a Confederate. Dowling is really the center of old Black 3rd Ward. And one of the reasons for that is the creation or the purchase of Emancipation Park. And it's the first public space owned by Black people in the state of Texas.
With newfound freedom came new challenges, including the fight to be seen as equal.
Freed men and women did more than survive. They built a legacy.
And it is right here, Emancipation Park.
In Houston's historic 3rd Ward.
Emancipation Park was always a place to celebrate.
2 Black church congregations fundraised to buy the park. For them, the memory of Juneteenth would have been very fresh. They were someone else's property less than a decade earlier.
I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Jack Yates. He was instrumental in purchasing Emancipation Park, where the free slaves celebrated Juneteenth.
One of the most famous families in Reconstruction era Houston were the Yates family.
He was free. However, his wife and children weren't. So he came to Texas and entered back into slavery so that he could be with his family.
They were brought here to continue to be slaves.
Once freedom came again, he knew what that tasted like. He knew what that felt like. So he took his family and moved to Houston to start a brand new life.
Jack Yates actually began helping and teaching and helping them to learn, because at that time, you know, slaves weren't supposed to read or write.
He was a wage laborer as his day job, and at night preach near the Buffalo Bayou in Houston. And then gradually they were able to build their own church.
I'm a member of Antioch Missionary Baptist Church and have been all of my life. That was the first church that he started, but there were many other churches that he started, including Bethel in Houston.
It is that spirit, it is that zeal, it is that determination that he and others poured into the foundations when they built this church. So when you talk about World War I, our soldiers went off to fight. When they came home, Antioch was able to train and cross-train ex-veterans in masonry work, in carpentry work, and really help these ex-soldiers to find jobs and to provide homes for their families, education for their children. It was these very women from this very church who taught other women how to vote.
So many great people have been here and have been inspiring and galvanizing the community.
When I was growing up in Houston, I knew the name Yates because it was the name of a high school, Jack Yates High School in 3rd Ward, the first Black school in Houston. For a while had just been called Houston Colored High School. As the Black community spreads and grows in other parts of the city, you need more schools. So when a second high school is established in Houston in 3rd Ward, it's named after Jack Yates.
A massive mural in Galveston's tourist-heavy Strand district depicts the long journey to absolute equality.
Expand the narrative of Juneteenth to tell a more full story of our shared American history. The things that have been invisible are becoming visible, and the stories that have been hidden are being discovered.
Galveston Historical Foundation member and Hitchcock-born businessman Sam Collins made it his business to have Galveston's history on display. I met with him at the mural, an art installation that Sam wanted to use to paint a better picture of Juneteenth, giving it depth and dating it back to centuries before the emancipation of slaves. Artist and activist Reginald Adams brought the vision to life with detailed vignettes featuring historic figures.
And then he moves through the Middle Passage, the enslaved Africans being sold by other Africans. Harriet Tubman is an iconic female image on the mural. Then you have Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation.
The soldiers have a very prominent place within this mural. There are more soldiers than anyone else here on the mural, it seems like.
The United States colored troops represent 75% of the Union forces that came into Texas. Nowhere in the history books, when I was in elementary, junior high, high school, or even college, did anybody teach me that colored troops helped bring the message of freedom here.
Just beyond the mural and at the end of the same lot, side of the old Osterman building and where General Granger signed the orders and dispersed the troops to post them, is the Juneteenth historical marker from the Texas Historical Commission.
And I thought, how can that be? One of the most historic events in American history didn't have a subject marker.
Sam Collins spent 2 years fundraising and organizing efforts to secure one.
One of the things that I've worked to do is not to take away from what has already been told, but to add to it. This corner has now been transformed into an outdoor classroom. We're going to use technology to teach this history through augmented reality. Point their smartphone at the mural using the Uncover Everything app, and videos will pop up to expand the story so that they can learn more.
My girl Harriet and showing all the things that Black people have been going through and to be able to get the shackles off.
It all came together to create this beautiful mosaic of historian, artists, technology, visitors, tourists, people. All of that creates a beautiful picture of the expansion of knowledge, information, the history, and a lot of times they don't talk about that in the history classes. So we got to get them in the picture, not just him by himself. There we go.
Yes, sir.
His spirit and actions are one and the same, starting with the marker and now this mural.
Hopefully, individuals will wake up a desire for self-discovery and discovery of history that maybe was not taught in the classroom, so now they come to the outdoor classroom.
Some of the early Juneteenth celebrations were marked by pageantry, flowers, and people riding in these very elaborate coach setups.
Regional and local Black newspapers celebrating the day. You'll see announcements about picnics that are related to the holiday.
A lot of people for those celebrations dressed up in their Sunday best. They would just be joyful. There would be parties, church services, you know, in a lot of the communities, whites didn't want to recognize those celebrations. If some of those former slaves had jobs, they couldn't get the day off to celebrate. A lot of the city officials said, well, you can't have your celebration in the city. And so that would push those celebrations out away from the city in rural settings, in pastures, meadows, you know, groves, wherever. They went with the flow.
I guess my earliest memories of celebrating Juneteenth would be when I was a child. Juneteenth was always a big celebration in our community.
Eventually you'll see the establishment of parades. We know in Houston we do have a couple of parades. In fact, Juneteenth Queen and King.
Family get-togethers, community get-togethers. You would have barbecue, watermelon,
ribs and hot sausage,
red soda pop. Those were the staples. You had to have all of that on Juneteenth. You must have that barbecue.
In recent years, Juneteenth celebrations continue to include parades and music, but most importantly, a focus on the food. And one restaurant that continues to provide Juneteenth meals, even amidst the pandemic, is Lucille's.
Feeding all the people they can, this fine dining Houston establishment, home to a culinary artist carrying on the family's legacy of African-American excellence in gastronomy.
Beautiful.
This Museum District restaurant is Lucille's. It is where the past meets the present on a plate. Restaurant itself is named after owner and executive chef Chris Williams' great-grandmother, Lucille B. Smith.
Often noted as Texas's first African-American businesswoman. She created the first instant hot roll mix in the history of this country, which is a recipe that Pillsbury borrowed to create their empire. This is verified by the Chicago Tribune in 2014. She was the first national African-American food editor for Sepia magazine, which is now Ebony magazine. Her client list included everybody from LBJ to the Roosevelts, Martin Luther King, to Muhammad Ali, to Joe Louis, and all points in between.
Chef Williams continues the family legacy, having hosted President Biden. But it is not just the powerful for whom he hosts or prepares food for.
So we provide service to all the historically black neighborhoods, from Sunnyside to 3rd Ward to 5th Ward to Acres Home.
Having founded the nonprofit Lucille's 1913, the year his great-grandmother birthed her catering business, and also the same year marking the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation.
At our peak, we were doing 1,800 meals a day.
So I had a pork shoulder that I braised for about 4 hours.
Allows them to play with a ton of different ingredients.
This Juneteenth, he'll prepare more meals.
The barbecue chicken, the beans.
On top of the already 250,000 meals served.
And that's what we're working on right now for the menu for today. Getting ready to feed the people of Houston.
Delivering dignity and preserving history.
The restaurant does pay homage to her culinary freedom and creativity as a chef.
With fresh, elevated food.
It's exactly what we do over today at Lucille's. It's Southern cuisine with global influences.
The word Reconstruction sounds good, and it started out well-intentioned, but it didn't stay, quote-unquote, Reconstruction, did it?
No. When we think about the period of Reconstruction, particularly here in Texas, we always have to think about the turmoil around politics.
The Democratic Party was conservative. The Republican Party was liberal. 1870 15th Amendment is what makes Black men's right to vote constitutional. And this changes the political landscape of parts of the South that had large Black populations. Black men start voting other Black men into office. Some places had Black sheriffs. So this immediately changes the politics of the South. So the Ku Klux Klan arises as the violent wing of the Democratic Party.
We were familiar with the KKK, but there were a number of white vigilante groups that existed during this time that terrorized African Americans.
By the early 1900s, the Black community had already established itself with neighborhoods, businesses, and schools, but Blacks still weren't considered as equal. With segregation and Jim Crow laws, they were still being treated like second-class citizens.
Segregation laws restricted every public space where Southerners could possibly make contact. When we say Jim Crow law, we're referring to legal segregation. Boston creates segregation laws in order to separate Black and white passengers on city streetcars in the 1840s. People in Boston started to refer to the Black section of streetcars as the Jim Crow section. They did that because Jim Crow referred to a popular minstrel figure. Early on, it was white performers, typically white men, who would blacken their faces using burnt cork, but Jim Crow was the most popular blackface minstrel character. So popular that many white people in the United States began to identify the name Jim Crow with Black people.
Here in Houston, you really can't think about Jim Crow laws without thinking about the 24th Infantry, African American soldiers who found themselves here at Camp Logan and found themselves the victims of police brutality and Jim Crow laws and segregation.
Right, you're absolutely right. In the summer of 1917, the United States enters World War I. The U.S. military was still segregated. The military was constructing a training facility called Camp Logan.
So when these 700 Black soldiers show up in Houston, Jim Crow is alive and well. And you got to remember, it's a new thing. And these soldiers had fought in the Spanish-American War, had gone up San Juan Hill, that fought in the Philippines, they weren't used to being treated as second-class citizens.
It all came to a head that August when Houston police officers were accused of attacking and killing one of the soldiers. Black soldiers of Camp Logan then marched from what's now Memorial Park to the city of Houston.
This was a push against Jim Crow authority.
Mutiny and rioting ensued.
It was a strike against police brutality.
16 white people were killed, mostly civilians. 4 black soldiers died. The deadly encounter led to the soldiers' court-martial, the largest murder trial in U.S. history.
I saw the photograph of the trial. It blew my mind. Here are these 63 black soldiers surrounded by white soldiers with fixed bayonets on their rifles. And the caption said the largest murder trial in American history. And I had never heard anything about this, nothing.
In the end, 19 soldiers were hanged and all but 8 of 118 soldiers charged were convicted for their part in the Houston riot of 1917.
The police force of southern cities would send certain police officers to patrol black communities. Slave patrols in many parts of the South literally become police forces whose job it is to then police newly formed black communities.
Plantations ultimately turned to prisons, with slave labor giving way to prison labor all across Texas, including Sugar Land.
This building is actually 80 years old. It was originally a prison and part of the Texas prison system.
It was an extension of the Central State Prison Farm. The big brick building known as 2 Camp opened in 1939.
It was a prison population of color, primarily African American, some Hispanic.
The inmates worked the fields of the state-run farm. An inmate recalled that upon arriving at 2 Camp in 1960, he was immediately ushered out into the fields to pick cotton. At the end of a grueling day, workers would return to the dormitory, where life was often just as hard.
They lived in very close quarters, actually in very hot conditions and very cold conditions.
Its occupants are mostly children now, but for 30 years, this structure housed inmates.
Did you know the Freedom Tree in Missouri City is where slaves at the Palmer Plantation were notified they were free? They were told they could continue working the land, but their only form of payment would be a share of their crop. The Freedom Tree is located along Misty Hollow Drive, that's between Glen Lakes and Lake Olympia Boulevards.
All right.
General Order number 3, the Juneteenth order.
The people of Texas. Thanks for working on the full screen also. That's awesome.
Happy to help.
All right, we will start with, let's go Thompson first.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty impressive. Heavy reliance on graphics and animations. Looks like some After Effects wizardry, with the paint transitions, the on-screen timelines. It was very creative. Thought the music was effective and brought out the emotion of the story, and there was edits to the music, especially that I noticed in like the mural section where there was a lot of percussion and they did some kind of like fast cuts to the music. It all felt very in tune. I'd say one of my only critiques, I know they were trying to like work the correspondence into the story. I thought it was effective in the moments that the correspondents were speaking, but when they just did the correspondent on screen and they were just kind of like nodding their head or cutting away to them nodding their head, I was like, that kind of takes me out of the story rather than like brings me into the story. I know their correspondence probably just needs some screen time, but I thought that could have been cut out. So.
Awesome. Raquel?
Yeah, I have to agree with Nathan. I liked the graphics and I liked how they pulled, historical photos and then also went to those places, the ones that still exist today, and like being able to see them in relation now. It's like research wise, it's super informative and educational. I feel like I learned a lot watching this. But I will say that I got really distracted when the anchor was kind of just on the screen without their, like, she didn't have a purpose at that moment to just nod. And it would have been nice to just stay with who was speaking. And then the other thing that I noticed was that the lighting was not consistent in a lot of the interviews. That was a little distracting. But other than that, I thought it was just a huge undertaking, and it was done really well.
Nice. Priya?
Yeah, I agree with the positive points that both Nathan and Raquel had mentioned. That it was very graphics and animation forward, and I thought that was really strong. And the sort of colors that they chose as themes for graphics. And of course, this was, incredibly compelling piece and relevant cultural content to the conversations that are happening today. My two critiques are very similar to what's already been said. I thought the stand-ups, particularly where the reporters or presenters were shown, really kind of took away from the cadence of the narrative that was presented, and even sort of some of the narration when they were on screen, sort of doing that anchor voice, sort of took away a little bit of the seriousness of sort of what the topic and what they were saying. And then also to Raquel's point, I did notice also that the lighting wasn't totally consistent with some of the interviews, and even in some of the editing of the interviews, there were some shots that were a little too close up, and then that was obviously sort of inconsistent with some of the other sort of interviews that they did. So those were the two kind of critiques that I would say.
Awesome. And then Nathan O'Neill. He said, nope, I'm out of here.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think I largely agree with what everybody has said so far. I believe that, the graphics kind of really set up a theme throughout the entire piece. And as we know, I mean, pulling off hour-long piece and keeping it compelling and moving, and the pacing, I think they did really well with that. And still letting some of those moments breathe. I believe in the first part of the piece, there were just moments where there could have been an edit, but then the person just kind of sighs. And that says so much more right there than anything that else they could have continued with, or if they would have, clipped off that piece. It was just, that real sense of humanity in the moment. Something that I go back and forth on the on-camera appearances, because I'm kind of part of that world, and I know the thought process that's behind it. Usually it's like, if they have a Zoom interview, they're looking right at the camera, so they want to make it clear that, and it's different quality, they want to make it clear that they were on a Zoom, so they show the two shot just to kind of fly that for people. And then sometimes the anchors or on-air personalities just want to show that presence and show that they're involved in the story. So I'm kind of straddling the fence on that a little bit. But overall, I think it was really impactful and educational piece that I just feel like the timeline kind of approach with the graphics really helps kind of keep you visually aware of what you're talking about. There was some banners that came up just to keep you in the theme of, like, this is what we're talking about if you tuned in at some point, not at the beginning. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a really impressive piece.
Awesome, thanks. I know lighting came up a couple times. Just this is the editor category, but it's not to say the editor could not have also fixed that in post, fix it in post. So just throw that out there as a point, just as far as what you're, when you come to ranking them, what points maybe way more than others. Not to say that it wasn't a valid point. It was a valid point. We can go into our next one. This one's going to be about 25 minutes. Let me know if you want to take a break real quick before we go into it, if you need to stand up and stretch, or if you just want to roll into this next one. If we're all good, then we'll go into the next piece.
Say, let me see your hands. You put your hands up. Got him? Put your hands on top of your head. Step out of the vehicle and step away from me, all right?
In Minneapolis tonight, tensions are high as 4 police officers have been fired.
Get out of the car.
I didn't know. Identified as George Floyd. Okay, man. George Floyd calls his death an act of murder.
Once someone has been restrained, they should not be kept prone.
Do you believe people die from this?
I do, yes.
No! On the ground! On the ground!
I don't know what it's going to take to stop this.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, I'll get on the ground.
Down. Get him, guys! Get him! Hold on.
No brainer, it's obvious. And now it's time for the law enforcement and the policing community to catch up.
Don't move. 10-15 off where you
Hey, you good, man? Hey, I don't feel anything. I don't feel pulse. Yeah, let's
No, he's dead.
He didn't just die down there, did he? Hope I didn't kill him.
Hey, you with us? Come on, buddy. Chad.
I heard a little breathing.
Hey, Chad.
Chad. Wake up, pal.
Start compressions.
I go downtown and I look for him. Yeah. When I drive downtown, I see someone with a similar walk, and I'm like, is that? And then you have to remember, it's not him.
Michael Marshall dipped in and out of his loved ones' lives like a breeze.
He disappeared a lot, always.
His sister Brenda and niece Natalia would see him on street corners, outside offices, always smiling, always telling stories.
He was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic.
They always say handle it, and that's all we can do is handle it.
The street felt more comfortable than home, not that he avoided the opportunity to visit theirs.
He would show up for all the family dinners, and he's always the life of the party. He'd always have you laughing and have you going.
Marshall weighed little more than 110 pounds, stood a few inches taller than 5 feet when he arrived in the downtown Denver jail. Disturbing the peace brought him here. A $100 bond kept him here.
It looks like he's trying to walk past the officer, and that's when they just slam him into the wall.
9 days prior, each deputy received an email, a warning really. We found it in an open records request. Once the subject has been restrained, immediately place him into a recovery position, adding, "Do not put weight on an arrestee's back for a prolonged period."
Denver Police Dispatch.
The Denver Independent Monitor would conclude the deputies ignored that warning for 9 minutes and 12 seconds.
We need some detectives come out. We had we think it's a death in custody.
Instead of going to court, the city handed the Marshall family $4.6 million.
What they did to him, it hurts. And I just sit there and I watch him, and you know he's dying. As you watch this video and you see what they do to him, it hurts.
20 years before Marshall's death, in 1995, the U.S. Department of Justice sent this bulletin to law enforcement officers across the country. A person lying on his stomach has trouble breathing when pressure is applied to his back. As a result, the bulletin said, as soon as the suspect is handcuffed, get him off his stomach.
Get off him. Get him on his side. Get him upright.
Jack Ryan has trained officers for decades. He says he's considered going to great lengths to teach this simple lesson.
As I've said in training at times that we ought to have that printed on the dashboard of the police car or maybe tattooed to the back of everybody's hand. Get off them and get them into a position that facilitates breathing.
Just prone him out. He calls it a recovery position, and when used properly, it saves lives.
And there's really no downside, there's only upside to it. And I say this in training, what do you lose by that?
Get on the ground.
No risk, no downside.
All the way down. Okay.
And yet he knows officers either forget it,
He's not doing nothing.
or ignore it,
He's not doing anything, guys.
or are oblivious to it.
David 34, step up the ambulance, code 3.
We found at least 121 deaths since 2010 that followed prone restraint. In a country that's 60% white, more than 60% of those we found were either black or Hispanic. We also found many of their families in states all over the country, each wondering why someone they loved died under a pile of officers.
I guess the only thing that surprises me is that you only found 100.
Abigail Serra has worked to reform the Minneapolis Police Department for years.
My professional opinion is there's very likely many, many more.
She bases that, in part,
Come on, David.
on this. David Smith died prone 1 decade before the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. As part of a $3 million settlement, the Minneapolis Police Department agreed to receive additional training on prone restraint. It didn't stick, says Sarah. George Floyd's death proved that.
There's no question. The Minneapolis Police Department continued to do all of this after David Smith.
David Smith, like 61% of the people on our list, was mentally ill, making mental illness the single most common characteristic of those who died.
Paranoid constantly, but never really angry.
Everybody,
Do you see what I see?
Back in Denver, Michael Marshall's family wonders if Michael's paranoia of officers contributed to this.
They never got off. I don't know why. They never got off.
Had Marshall ended up in a state hospital, a Colorado law passed a decade ago would have barred hospital staff from doing this. The law does not apply to anyone outside a hospital, and certainly not to deputies inside a jail.
You see more people get upset that we're upset that this is happening to us. You see more people get devastated that you're accusing this cop of murder. I can't believe you accused this hero of murder. But what else do you call it when someone's handcuffed and have all that pressure on their back pressed into that ground or the floor? All they have to do is get off.
And yet they don't, or they won't.
Steve, calm down. Just calm down. They're gonna let you go if you calm down.
Stephen Neroff died prone and handcuffed inside a California jail in 2014.
They're not gonna hurt you, Steve. Just let them do their thing.
When his family sued the county did what cities and counties have done for years.
We're back on the record. The time is 11:01 a.m.
It hired Dr. Gary Vilk, an ER doctor out of San Diego. His conclusion:
I don't believe that the deputies in there resulted or caused the death. So.
It's something he said over and over again.
Just breathe, Steve.
The officers on top simply do not kill the person below. In 20 years, by his own account, he has yet to find an officer responsible for any prone restraint death. You call him a hired gun.
Well, he is a hired gun.
Attorney Isaac Schwager says far too often defendants in these cases rely on Dr. Vilk. In one case, Schwager went as far as to tell a jury this about Dr. Vilk. He's not here to tell the truth. He's here to make a living. And people continue to die on account of that. The jury, he says, apparently listened. Is it fair to say the jury did not believe Vilk's testimony?
I think that they had to reject his testimony wholesale in order to return the verdict that they did.
Jurors awarded Branch Ross' family $4 million.
If he's saying he can't breathe, he's breathing clearly.
You'd be hard-pressed to find any prone restraint case these days that doesn't include Dr. Vilk's research. For decades, his team has placed weights on the backs of volunteers to see if the weight impairs breathing. It does, just not enough to kill, he says. Defendants have welcomed that finding.
In cases I testified in, yes, the testimony has been on behalf of the defense.
When was the last time that you testified or took part in a deposition for a plaintiff in a case like this?
Oh, been a long time.
When he agreed to talk with us, we asked him about that hired gun accusation. Your thoughts on that?
I am paid for my services, so I do get paid, so I'm hired. Not necessarily a hired gun in my mind.
You just said not necessarily. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's a term somebody's using. I get hired for my expertise and for giving opinions.
Prone restraint, he insists, is safe. It does not kill.
That answer is no. The position itself is physiologically neutral.
Counsel, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call our first witness this morning, Dr. Martin Tobin.
Maybe you missed it. We didn't. This even came up during the trial of the officer now convicted of murdering George Floyd.
Are you aware of studies suggesting that putting someone in the prone position and putting a weight on the back is not dangerous?
Yes, I'm aware of these studies. They largely come out from San Diego, from the group of Dr. Chan and Vilke and his colleagues.
He might not have pronounced the name correctly, but when asked about Vilk's research...
Are you able to generally characterize the nature of these studies for the jury?
Dr. Tobin said this.
The bottom line is they're highly misleading. The problem is in these particular studies, first of all, they take perfectly healthy volunteers, they bring them into the physiology lab, and they lay them flat and they put a mat underneath them, which is different than the street.
Relax. Man, I can't breathe my face.
While the knee to the neck got all the attention, Dr. Tobin said, and expert after expert concurred, it was the prolonged prone restraint that killed George Floyd.
What I want to know is why the news media has not picked up on this.
Dr. Alon Steinberg says the issue we've raised is a critical one. His recent study looking into prone restraint research concluded anyone who suggests the position can't kill someone is flat out wrong.
I mean, it's just logical. It's just logical. We keep seeing it over and over. How many times do we need to see it?
The cardiologist wants medical examiners across the country to now list these deaths as prone restraint cardiac arrest.
That's what happens. They get in this position and it's multifactorial and it caused the heart to stop and that's why people die.
Other doctors we found agree.
This is actually a really serious, severe, scary medical time where if we don't do the right thing, these patients can die.
Dr. Stephen Bird helped convince jurors in Denver to award millions to the family of Marvin Booker. He says something known as metabolic acidosis likely explains many of the deaths on our list.
Even a small degree of ventilatory impairment, decreased ability to ventilate in the setting of a severe metabolic acidosis, has severe consequences.
We all breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. It's the latter that worries Dr. Bird. When officers linger on the backs of people prone, they limit the ability to breathe out.
The acid level in your blood goes up and your pH goes down.
The longer the officers linger, the more acidic and potentially toxic the blood becomes. The solution, he says, is mind-numbingly obvious. If you get off that person who's handcuffed, the chances of them dying in front of you go way down.
I think that's absolutely true.
Has any of your research involved the possibility of acidosis?
We have not really looked at acidosis from the perspective of my particular research.
If you hire Gary Vilk, you know what you're going to get?
Absolutely. Yep. You're going to get Gary Vilk saying that the restraint did not kill the victim.
Attorney Julia Sherwin deposed Dr. Vilk for the Stephen Naroth case, a case which eventually settled for $5 million. She said Dr. Vilk's research is inherently flawed.
None of the subjects were mentally ill, of course, right?
Not to our knowledge, no.
None of them were in their 50s, were they?
Correct.
What is the biggest flaw with Dr. Vilk's research?
His research subjects are either police recruits who are required to be healthy or college athletes.
Not that it matters much to those who continue to hire him.
Does he have a pulse?
Oh, no.
Start CPR.
Earlier this year, a grand jury in New York cleared 3 officers in the prone restraint death of number 110 on our list, Daniel Prude, the key medical witness hired by the state attorney general, Dr. Gary Vilk. Once she hired Gary Vilk, was the outcome preordained?
I think so.
Flying on the ground and banging his head on the ground.
Before you go to the same, it's 10-4 for medics.
10-4, if you'll start towards 1700 North Carlton Avenue for an EMS assist.
Consider the death of Daniel Turner.
What is his name?
Daniel.
A matter of time.
4118, subject has stopped breathing.
Daniel.
4118, copy, subject has stopped breathing.
For 2 minutes and 50 seconds, Farmington police held a handcuffed Turner, a man experiencing a mental health crisis, prone.
How long is too long?
As soon as you get past that couple of seconds, it's too long.
University of South Carolina law professor Seth Stoughton, a former police officer,
Your Honor, the state calls Seth Stoughton,
told the jury in the Derek Chauvin trial, once officers have handcuffed someone, the need for prone restraint ends.
It's just not appropriate to prone someone who is, at that point, cooperative.
3 minutes too long.
3 minutes is absolutely too long.
And yet, our analysis found officers lingering on the backs of people prone and handcuffed.
Just relax, pal. Just relax.
For 5 minutes, 50 seconds.
Angel! Angel! Medics.
9 minutes, 41 seconds.
You're gonna be alright. Tony, relax. You don't need to be squirming, man. Stop. We're trying to get you help, man.
14 minutes, 19 seconds.
Get out of my wrist, I can't breathe. You're talking, I can't breathe.
And 17 minutes, 22 seconds.
Oh my God. That's absurd. It's keeping in that prone restraint position?
Yeah.
That's unfathomable.
Unfathomable to Neville's son and daughter as well.
You know, now not only did he lose his life, but he lost his life in this horrible way.
Just make the changes so that other families don't have to deal with this kind of pain.
We have an obligation as police officers not only to protect and preserve our colleagues' life, but human life, period.
Mark Claxton, a retired New York City detective, represents the Black Law Enforcement Alliance.
Hey, relax, dude.
He says better training,
because it's a matter of saving lives,
is critical, and law enforcement leaders and trainers need to say so.
If the person is unable to offensively, physically attack you, then of course the rules change and your response has to change.
Drew, take some breaths. Relax, man, relax.
Our investigation found officer after officer surprised.
Okay, we're gonna pulse, but I'm not feeling any breathing on there.
If you're not getting nothing, start compressions.
Surprised by the death of the person below.
Hey. David 34, step up the ambulance, code 3.
I think he's unconscious.
Keep breathing. Hey. Hey. Roll him over.
He's not very conscious right now.
Not wanting to find his officers surprised.
Dad, you doing all right?
Earlier this year, Denver's police chief agreed to show parts of our initial investigation. Why'd you do that? To his entire department and use it during training.
To strengthen the culture so that way we could prevent tragedies like you've demonstrated in prone.
And is it clear that once you have somebody handcuffed and they're prone, you gotta turn them over?
You gotta turn them over.
After CARE TV aired the prone investigation in Minnesota, that state's largest police department,
Positional asphyxia can happen under a wide variety of circumstances.
agreed to do the same.
We're not talking about dramatic changes in officer actions. We're talking about turning someone 90 degrees.
His words suggested.
Can I get a taxi cab to the AMPM?
Suggested he needed.
This is 911, not a taxi cab.
Needed more than a ride home. Police responded, found a still confused Shane Sutherland inside.
You paying for it? Let's get outside. Keep your hands where I can see him.
That night, an officer told Shane's mother the news.
He told me that my son stood up and collapsed and stopped breathing after he had called 911 from an AM/PM store in Stockton.
Technically, it wasn't a lie. Technically.
We got one in cuffs, but he's still fighting with us.
A month later, police released this body camera footage that shows Shane Sutherland handcuffed and prone and screaming for at least 2 minutes and 55 seconds.
I'm sorry. At about 3 minutes, they say he's turning colors.
Hey, he's turning colors here.
When someone's telling you for over 2 minutes, I can't breathe, why do you ignore that?
George Floyd's death did not stop this from happening. We found at least 6 prone restraint deaths since Floyd's.
This is really a training failure across the board, and it's creating an epidemic of unnecessary deaths.
Attorney Julia Sherwin helped the state of Minnesota figure out how to prosecute the officer who killed Floyd. She says our investigation highlights a national problem.
We don't have standards like that nationally that are overseen nationally in the United States, and we really need it.
Take, for example, the Congressional George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which the U.S. House passed earlier this year. It contains all sorts of police reform measures, yet does not contain one word about prone restraint.
The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act does not stop the one thing that killed George Floyd.
It's a real problem. You know, it's unfortunate that we have people who are writing legislation who don't really necessarily inform themselves of what's happening out in the real world.
We reviewed state legislation as well and found only Nevada requires officers to place someone prone and handcuffed into a recovery position.
He was inside of a secure holding facility and surrounded by 6 officers and then was handcuffed.
In 2015, Nicholas Gilbert died under several deputies. A complaint filed by his family suggests those deputies held a handcuffed Gilbert prone for as many as 15 minutes.
And all 6 of them, collectively they weighed more than 1,300 pounds, held him down.
John Taylor recently helped file this petition with the U.S. Supreme Court asking the court to review the case. It argues officers have had more than enough time to educate themselves on the dangers of prone restraint.
It's the officer who has the upper hand. It's the officer who poses a threat to the person who is handcuffed and not the other way around.
All rise for the jury.
George Floyd's death received international scrutiny.
Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict.
In no small part due to Derek Chauvin's left knee.
The thing that got all of the attention was the knee on the neck.
Those who listened to his trial.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, find the defendant guilty.
They know the other knee was just as, if not more, responsible for Floyd's death.
I think, it's possible if Chauvin just had one knee on Mr. Floyd's neck and there was no other weight on him at all, Mr. Floyd may have survived.
One day before the Chauvin verdict.
Did you say your name was Mario?
And halfway across the country.
Do you have an ID on you?
Another man experiencing a mental health crisis.
If you can't do that, then I'm going to have to take you, okay?
A man named Mario Gonzalez.
Just keep your hands out of your pockets, please.
Appeared unsteady and uncertain. He had no weapons, had threatened no officers.
There's something here, okay? There's something here. Hey, come over here. Mario, please don't resist us, okay? We just gotta figure out what's going on, all right? So just get your cooperation real quick here.
Within minutes, two officers sent him to the ground, where they held him prone minute after minute, despite the instincts of one of those officers.
Think we can roll him on the side?
I don't want to lose what I got, man.
Okay.
If you've paid any attention to this investigation, you know what happened next.
No pulse. Let's start CPR.
Gonzalez is number 121 on our list, a list we know will grow unless something changes.
It is difficult to watch officers continue to make that same mistake. We're not talking about just extending someone's physical discomfort a little bit. We are talking about potentially killing someone.
All right. We'll start off with O'Neill.
Yeah, I mean, just the lapel camera footage. I mean, that is, the gut-wrenching piece of all of this, and I feel like the editor did a pretty good job of weaving it in and out. Something that I really liked how it kind of started off, which was just like the audio underneath photos. So you didn't really see what was going on, but you could hear it. So gut-wrenching for such a powerful and crucial story, and an issue that obviously needs more attention across the country. And the scope of it is just of the piece itself is just really commendable. As far as the editing goes, I really liked, the graphical work, was very clean, black and white, simple. It kind of really just let the video and the interview speak for themselves. The only thing that I would bring up as a criticism was I think there were some audio level issues here and there, particularly maybe with like the track of the reporter. Sometimes it's a little difficult to hear. Words were kind of trailing off, so it was kind of hard to understand sometimes whenever it was placed against a piece of really intense video, for example. But overall, I believe, as far as the piece itself, just a really well researched, well put together, well edited, in-depth look at this issue. So,
all right, Miss Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a really smart investigative piece, and the visuals accompanied by really good editing and narration were really the main drivers for that. To Nate's point, I mean, the audio at the beginning and just hearing that with sort of like the pictures of just you're able to see the pictures and really hear the audio without the sort of video visuals was chilling, and I just thought really effective opener. And then of course later on the weaving in of the lapel footage was just, I mean, it was chilling and compelling and scary to watch. Overall, I just thought it was pretty consistent. From an editing standpoint, I thought it was a really smart edit. I didn't really have a whole lot of I can't really think of any big critiques just on my end. I thought it was holistically very good, and edit-wise really strong.
Thank you. Thompson.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the clean minimalist style. I thought it very much just let the story kind of take the front seat, I mean, in comparison to the last documentary that was very just heavy on, or busy, I guess. I really appreciated how clean this was. I thought it almost felt branded in a way, like even the interviews with the correspondents were consistent with the whole look and feel, and the transitions to those interviews. I think Priya said it right. It just felt holistically nice. And I wasn't taken out of the story by seeing the correspondence in this piece. So I thought that was pretty stand apart. And then, yeah, everything in the story just felt tucked into this like graphic ecosystem where even the articles, there was like this nice transition from the top and bottom that then framed the article. And then the pictures would transition in. So it all felt like everything lived in this like kind of white world, which almost made, what's happening feel darker, And then I thought I was really blown away with how the graphic timeline, featured George Floyd's picture. And then it just continued on to show that, hey, this is still a really intense problem. Visually, that really showed us that the problem is still happening today. So.
Thank you, Nathan. Raquel.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what all the judges have said thus far. I think this is such an important piece. I also appreciated all the different perspectives. I enjoyed that they talked to police officers and people who were also in that world, because I feel like oftentimes that's not the case. I loved the minimal element as well. I liked that it was just about the story and the pace was great. And I really enjoy that it didn't just linger on George Floyd. I'm sure it was tempting to include footage from the last 2 years of just all of this, but I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad that it maintained it stayed on the course of making sure that everybody's story was told, and especially the ones that we haven't heard about. Again, great research as well. I totally agree. The fact that George Floyd's law literally doesn't even have the thing, like that really like just blew my mind. Overall, it was just a very engaging 24 minutes. I can't believe that was only 24 minutes. I could have kept going. So good one.
Nice. Thank you. We have another one. The next one is going to be about an hour. So if we need to take a break, let me know. Would anyone like to take a break before we dive into this next one? You guys are troopers. All right.
I'm good.
So
one last call out for the last piece. Seeing the golf course behind that doctor was just so enraging. Like this guy's literally just like banking off of lying about all these cases, and he's just got a golf course that he's kicking it like in the background. That was wild to see.
It was the mini fridge for me too. It was the whole setup. He was just like chilling there, like he had just finished the game, and he's like, hey, let me get this interview over with. I was just like,
for that guy.
Yeah.
Great job, guys. Great discussion. One thing to keep in mind also is at the end of all of this, you will also have the incredibly hard duty of picking a documentary of the year. And that's selected by you all of all of the entries that you're currently watching. So as you're taking notes and you're critiquing, put a little asterisk or a star to the ones that stand out. And we're going to have to whittle down from all of these down to one. So it could be one from the series. It's going to be, could be one from short form, from long form. It's going to be tough. So even if you want to create, again, your own ranking system, but keep that in mind that there's going to be an overall documentary of the year. So we'll go into this next one. This one's, like I said, just about an hour. Luckily, the one after that one you have already seen. So we can watch that one, or we can just go straight into discussion if you don't need to rewatch it. So this may be our last one in this category. And then one last thing also, if at any point during any of these entries, if there is anything that is just so egregiously bad, if like there are 6 jump cuts in a row that weren't on purpose, or you just see blue video, or again, anything egregiously bad where you're like, nope, this should not even be a finalist, raise your hand or come on camera. Don't feel obligated to finish a piece that you don't think should be in this, if that makes sense. It's going to be very rare that you come across that, but some may make it through. So we'll go on
Didn't we
to the
see
next.
this one in the feature length?
Oh, did you guys watch? Okay.
Yeah.
Did everyone
Yeah, we
get
did.
through the feature length?
Yes.
Okay.
I did.
Do you all, does anyone need to watch this again or any piece for a refresher?
I would maybe watch like 5 to 10 minutes of it to see it from like the editing angle.
Okay.
Would that help anyone else?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because I didn't watch it with like that lens. Really.
Let's start it. And down here at the bottom, you see the reactions tab where you can raise hand, clap, thumbs up, all that. Let's just start it. And then just put a thumbs up once you feel you've jogged your memory enough for it. Once I see 4 thumbs up, then we can stop at that point.
Let me start out by saying we are here to announce that the state of Connecticut has reached an agreement with the plaintiffs in the Sheff versus O'Neill case. This agreement begins in a historic and meaningful way to resolve 30 years of litigation and to resolve one of the most important and complex cases of any kind in our state's history, one of the most significant desegregation and civil rights cases anywhere.
In the struggle for justice, we are accustomed to the fact that steps forward are accompanied by pushback, steps backwards. Today in this courtroom, we took a step forward.
In Hartford, Connecticut, schools were segregated and racially isolated in violation of the Connecticut Constitution.
The Connecticut Constitution had a whole article entitled Of Education, whereas the United States Constitution says not one word about education.
The lawyers chose 10 families and requested that Milo and I serve as the named plaintiff. He was his mother's son. I mean, we were community activists together. He thought it was going to be like a Judge Judy episode, you know, go in, state your case, 30 minutes, get your ruling, it's done. I expected it to take a little longer, but not 3 decades.
You can't overlook the fact that for 30 years, we've marginalized 3 generations of kids, and the fact that there are a lot of children who fell through the cracks with the unintended consequences of Sheff.
The worst mistake the courts make when they decide these cases is when they remand the case back to the state, the defendant, to develop the remedial plan. That's like asking the foxes to guard the hen's coop, because all the fox wants to do is eat the hen.
The constitutions of many states have specific language promising that every child will have an equal opportunity to receive a good education. The reality in many states is that children in the inner cities do not get the quality education available in the suburbs, which has led to a desegregation lawsuit in Hartford, Connecticut.
The Hartford Current ran a story, a kind of leak, that the State Board of Education had produced a report, which later got nicknamed the Tarazi Report, named after Gerald Tarazi, who was then the Commissioner of Education. And this Tarazi report came out and concluded that Connecticut schools were segregated. And Tarazi is quoted in that saying that segregation is illegal, and it's immoral, and it's educationally unsound.
These children are victims of compounded decades of delay and neglect by the state educational authorities
And all of a sudden, the mastery test scores came out, and the Hartford community saw how the students in Hartford were at the bottom of the bottom. They were not making reading goals, they were not making math goals, and they were not making writing goals.
This was a hot firecracker going off at 4th of July.
We went to a community meeting where a group of public interest lawyers had talked to the community about the condition of education for Hartford children. The statistic that caught my soul was that in 1989, 74% of students in Hartford's 8th grade needed assistance with remedial reading. So to me, that is not a number that indicates failure of the student. To me, that indicates failure of the system. Then I went to talk to Milo about it, because you recall that Milo is the named plaintiff. I'm just his mother.
It's fundamental. It's just like you can't grow a tree without soil. You can't have a better education without the basic supplies, books, pencils, pens.
And here we are, the state saying you people shouldn't even adjudicate a case in the one area where there's an affirmative constitutional responsibility. I read the Connecticut Constitution, and the Connecticut Constitution had a whole article entitled Of Education, whereas the United States Constitution says not one word about education. So that's why I brought the case in the Connecticut Superior Court. In other words, a state court, not a federal court, claiming a violation of the education article as well as the Equal Protection Clause of the Connecticut Constitution.
Sheff versus O'Neill gets underway in Hartford Superior Court. Channel 3's Diane Alverio joining us from the courthouse with that story. Diane?
Well, Janet, the long-awaited and much talked about Sheff versus O'Neill trial finally did get underway at about 12:30 today, with the stage set for a legal battle that may take months and which is being watched closely across the nation.
In addition to getting the legal theories together, you have to get the plaintiffs together, you have to get the experts together, you have to get the witnesses together. So John primarily took the lead in going and recruiting potential plaintiffs, and that's how he found Elizabeth.
We just luckily hit the jackpot. And not only did we find a strong, courageous leader, almost like a dream come through out of the sky, she had a young child named Milo.
Milo was already accustomed to community engagement, civil rights work, community activism, because that's who I am.
We live in a country where people of color are not afforded the same opportunities as people who are white simply because they are colored.
We believe in social justice, and so Milo was used to marching in Washington, candlelight vigils for persons living with HIV and AIDS. That was what I guess he thought normal life was about. So he chose to be a plaintiff.
The next big event on September 14th. So typically, now the invitation doesn't say this, but in September.
Love you. Have a good day. All right. Have a good day. That's schoolwork.
Today, Connecticut runs a voluntary school desegregation program that's been praised as a model for the nation. Families in Hartford and nearby suburbs can enroll their kids at their usual neighborhood schools, or they can enter a lottery for the chance to send their kids to magnet schools with specialized themes like arts or engineering. There's also open choice, where city students can be bused out to attend suburban public schools or vice versa. For schools to be considered integrated under Sheff, at least 25% of students must be white, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Native American, or Alaska Native. To be considered socioeconomically diverse,
Looks like
they
we're
must have
rotating to
fewer.
the last 5 minutes now.
Thank you, guys.
It seems about a good place to do it.
About my kid can't get in or something. You know, there are going to be problems. Sometimes they're short term, sometimes they're long term. But the fact that there are problems with implementing an integrated education doesn't mean that you just give it up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start out by saying we are here to announce that the state of Connecticut has reached an agreement with the plaintiffs in the Sheff versus O'Neill case. Immediate part now, a major investment in Hartford schools and in providing educational opportunities to the students of Hartford and the region.
Since 1997, when the state legislature approved a plan for voluntary integration, the Sheff plaintiffs have brought the state back to court numerous times over the last 2 decades. In 2003, an agreement was reached to build 8 magnet schools within 4 years. In 2008, another settlement expanded magnets and open choice options with more schools and seats for Hartford students. In 2017, the plaintiffs challenged the state wasn't giving Hartford students enough opportunities to attend integrated schools. The agreement in January of 2020 added 1,300 new seats in magnet schools. It also revamped the lottery system to be based on socioeconomic status and required the state to develop a long-term plan to ensure any child who wants to go to school in an integrated setting will be able to do so.
It was a milestone settlement. For the first time in the history of Sheff, not only did the governor come to the settlement conference.
You guys gave us a kick in the back of our pants there, and we needed that 30 years ago. We had to wake up. Our kids were falling behind. We're not getting their fair shot in education. We're going to be opening up more seats in terms of our magnet schools.
The best part of that settlement is the fact that the state and the plaintiffs agreed to work on a sustainability plan, one that would ensure continuation of the schools no matter what. So that's what I'm looking for. Honestly, I asked Milo to come today. He declined. Milo is here still in the state and trying to be not Milo Sheff, if you know what I mean. He's trying to be Milo. It has not been easy for him. I believe that when we lost in the lower court, I saw his childhood dissipate right in front of me, because he was certain that we had put on a case that brought justice, and when that justice wasn't realized then, it took away something from him. But we went on to the state Supreme Court and we won, but he's still not quite back from that. Still not quite back from that. I am not a Titanic person, right? I'm not the kind of person to say, well, if we can't save them all, let them all drown, right? We have helped thousands of children. We have provided opportunity for thousands of children. And so like my mother would say, if I can help just one somebody, I've done my job, right? So we've helped 1,000 somebodies. Half full, half empty. I think the glass is full, we just need a bigger glass.
right. Nathan Thompson, thank you so much for the input on that. I think that gave a good refresher and rounded scope. So for that, we'll start with you.
Sounds good. Yeah, I thought there's some nice energy in the beginning with the music really driving things forward, good pacing. I like how the interview edits with the multicam interviews kind of punched into the close-up for some emphasis on specific things. It was a really nice touch for some sound design as some of the file photos came in or someone's lower third came on, there was like typing or like a photo, like a camera sound. I thought that was just like a little nice accent for sound design that maybe was unique to this. Yeah, other than that, I mean, towards the ending, I thought the piece lost some of its energy and just kind of like slowed to a halt. Whereas I thought there was enough meat there that they could have kind of boosted it up. That last interview the last interview was just a little slow. I felt like they could have cut out a lot of the pauses and just got to the point a little quicker. I did like that ending point of, glass half full, glass half empty. We just need a bigger glass. That's great, but it just didn't have the gusto to it that I feel like it could have to just end strong.
Thanks. Raquel.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nathan on this one. It didn't really give me that like complete feeling at the end. Like it didn't just like kind of bring it all home. But I did make a note when I first saw it. I loved the opening scene. I thought like it actually did draw me in, and then I was in it. But it did have its moment where it kind of just flatlined a little bit, and then it kind of ended. But it was beautifully shot. It was a nice edit. I did like what you were saying, all the little details of the little like snapshot sounds and the typing, and I thought it was also fluid when, because this is being filmed since for a long time, and so it had to jump between like old news and then now and bringing it all kind of together. I thought it was sewn together pretty well. Yeah, that's all I have for this one.
O'Neill.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo previous thoughts on this, especially the ending. There was an opportunity. I really liked that last soundbite as well, but you could just tell that it was just a little bit of a hiccup just to get there. I really like the opening of this and the kind of build up to that title slide that just brings you in, and then to that raw clip, that news clip that is like of this kid, right, and his experience. And I think sometimes in using old footage, archive footage from news clips, there's a temptation to maybe over treat it with graphics or some stylization. But I feel like this is such a sometimes difficult topic to get into that could have gotten in the way very easily. And the fact that they kept it pretty simple in terms of graphics and I know they had some elements as far as like showing the maps and showing how the kids were getting bused or the opportunities where they could go. They kept it as simple as possible, which I think really helped keep you in it without getting too bogged down into the details. But yeah, overall, I thought it was really nice piece. I remember watching it the first time, and I thought it was very compelling to know that there are so many schools that are still dealing with this, and this is a 30-year plus fight. But yeah, I thought it was a nice edit. I just wish that there was that nice little cherry on top at the end.
Thank you. And Priya.
Yeah, as we were beginning to watch this, I just was looking at my notes from our sort of first viewing that we did by ourselves. And in my sort of lists of pros, I definitely noted the editing in this. So I'm glad that we had the opportunity to watch some of it again with sort of the editing in mind. And I agree with everything everyone said, particularly about the beginning and the setup. the way that the editor did that, I thought was really compelling. Overall, I thought this was really strong from a pacing and a cadence standpoint. And of course, that's a lot of that is with the editor. And I didn't really have any huge critiques of this. I agree with what everybody said about the end. That could have been tighter and stronger, but overall, I thought this was overwhelmingly very good, and particularly the editing. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Students, if we want to go to the next one, we just saw this next one too. I believe this was the CNN climate crisis. I just want to make sure it's the same submission. If we can just kind of, I don't know if you guys want to rewatch it. I would like to scrub through it just to make sure they just, since it is part of a series, make sure it's just not different parts of the series that we didn't see, just to give them a fair shake at it. So students, I don't know if you can scrub through it for us real quick.
Oh, do you want to jump around and watch different parts of it?
It looks to be the same. So yeah, let's jump around unless any of the judges would like to rewatch it from the beginning and just kind of go 5-10 minutes in again. Would love your input here and let me know what your thoughts are.
I'm a fan of rewatching portions of it just to
Okay.
really see focus on the editing personally.
Okay.
Agreed.
We'll
Agreed.
do.
Quick question
Yeah,
though,
we'll do the
is
same.
this the full series again, or is it just one piece of it?
Let's jump to the end, Aisha, and see, or just kind of like drag through it and see if it's the exact same.
Yeah, it's looking like it's just the same video.
Okay. Do you guys want to do first 5 and last 5 again?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Let's do that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for calling CNN.
I feel all sorry for all the people that are in the industry of oil and gas, coal, because we are all going to lose our jobs. The town that I live in Gillette, Wyoming, is oil and gas related, and everybody in this town is afraid that it's going to become a ghost town because of what Biden wants to do. Thank you. Bye.
Steven?
Howdy.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Mind if we come in?
Oh, come on in.
So, Steve, tell me what led you to leave this voicemail.
I just was upset about the election. I didn't like what Biden was going to do, and I was concerned about the jobs and my job.
This is Steve Gray. He drives workers to coal mines and rail yards, and he says he's been laid off from multiple jobs in the oil and coal industries.
I figured, well, yeah, I'm going to call, I'll never get any return, but it'd make me feel better. And then when you called me, I was like, okay, what did I get myself into now?
Gillette, Wyoming calls itself the energy capital of the nation. It's the hub of a region that produces roughly 40% of U.S. coal. If you live in one of these states, there's a pretty good chance that when you hit the light switch, your power originated here.
We have, as a policy, as a nation, basically created Gillette into what it is today.
The United States actually owns much of this land and has used various incentives and regulations to help will Gillette into existence.
There is an ownership interest literally on behalf of you and me.
So as coal use declines because of markets and the climate crisis, what responsibility do we have to Steve and other fossil fuel workers?
I would think a lot of people's idea was say, well, they'll just have to figure it out. But I do feel that You know, we did provide energy to the country for 40 years. I think there would be a benefit to help us transition into other industries or something else. We have so much here that to abandon it would be abandoning millions and billions of dollars.
I put Gray's question to the mayor. Will Gillette become a ghost town?
Well, I sure hope not, and I feel we are doing what we can so that doesn't happen. It's just a fact that coal production and the sale of coal is going down. You know, we just have to realize that Gillette can't be as dependent on the fossil fuel industry like we have been.
Gillette sits on top of the Powder River Basin, which is a massive deposit of coal. Small mines popped up in the early years, and then the town boomed in the 1970s.
These mines, these miners, the people of this region have powered our nation for the last 50 years. The amount that has been mined and shipped and burnt for power is really mind-boggling. They believe in what they do, and you hate to see that diminished by factors that are really out of their control.
In recent years, as natural gas boomed, coal in Wyoming went bust.
Now put it on, right?
President Trump tried to roll back environmental regulations and to bring back coal, but ultimately he couldn't stop the decline.
I guess I was kind of a little disappointed. You know, now whether it was all his fault or what happened, I don't know.
Hundreds of coal miners are out of their jobs. The Black Jewel Mining Company in Gillette unexpectedly shut down yesterday, locking out nearly 600 workers.
If I'm not driving, hauling these guys back and forth to their trains, I'm not getting paid. And I mean, as you can see with all these locomotives all lined up out here, that, you know, how bad it is. Didn't need as many trains to haul out all this coal. So they all brought them all out here. 95% of them were all in use. And I mean, it just keeps growing and growing. I lost pickups, got a divorce, bank accounts were drained, lost my house, you know, all the repossessions. So it was tough.
This is a painful reality, but it's Duluth, Minnesota.
We are known as the San Francisco of the North. I'll let you decide if you think that's true.
I traveled to Duluth, and I did so a little skeptically. I've reported on climate migration for years, usually from locations like Honduras, Puerto Rico, the Marshall Islands, places where people are being pushed out of their home. Was there another and less visible migration already underway? One in which people are choosing sites of refuge?
You know, a handful of years ago, I would have thought, that's a one-off. It is much more common now.
Duluth is embracing the idea of itself as a climate safe haven.
It feels really sad to me that we are at a place and a stage that people are actually considering abandoning the history of who they've been, of who their family's been, of where they've lived, and actually choosing to leave that. And at the same time, if that means that people can find that and build that narrative for themselves here in Duluth, it's an extraordinary place, and we do want to be that for people.
The city's climate and geography are part of the reason that some scientists say Duluth will fare better than most. Duluth is known for its sub-zero temperatures, which are getting a little warmer. It's far from the coasts, and there's one other huge reason.
Lake Superior is the largest of the North American Great Lakes. It contains about 10% of the liquid fresh water on the planet. The shifts that we've seen in climate, some of them I think arguably make it a little more pleasant. Warmer winters is not entirely unwelcome.
Local indigenous leaders near Duluth are concerned that a wave of climate migrants could further degrade the land and threaten their rights.
If you think northern Minnesota is beautiful, you're right. We welcome you if you are going to come here, then you need to support us as Indigenous peoples so that your climate solution doesn't end up in our cultural and spiritual genocide. This is treaty area for the Fond du Lac Band. And once again, we are going to bear the brunt of colonization. These will be new colonizers coming to the area. They're going to come here for reasons that have nothing to do with anything that tribal people have done.
People have been moved and removed from land for centuries. And so this concept of adding that kind of historical trauma into the conversation just makes it very, very complicated.
If you're coming for the clean water, can we still promise you clean water with 50,000 or 100,000 more people? Can we promise we're going to have a quality school or, an adaptable economy that meets everybody's needs? Don't kill the thing you love, and you can't stop individuals from doing it, but you can plan for it.
For now, Keenan and other researchers say many Americans are continuing to move toward the places that we know are becoming more dangerous. Toward the coast or toward the Southwest, for example, which is becoming more arid. But a few climate migrants are showing up in Duluth already. Do you consider yourself a climate migrant?
Yeah, I do. I think that's really hard to say, because I think on some level it sounds like we're giving up on California.
Jamie Alexander fled San Francisco with her husband and 2 children, unsure where to go, but certain that they couldn't stay for another wildfire season.
The 2018 Camp Fire happened, and that really changed everything for me. Our home didn't feel habitable to us anymore.
They miss San Francisco, but Alexander says Duluth has welcomed her family, and she couldn't be more grateful.
We are all sort of in this unknown together. There's no guidebook for this, and I found that really disconcerting, but also I think it helps us see our shared humanity in all of this.
I called up Tracy, whose message launched this trip, to see what she would make of this. What do you think about Duluth, Minnesota?
I'll go look. Maybe it's closer to San Francisco now than I realized. If so, that would be wonderful. Anywhere up north is cold, so it's not about the cold, it's really the culture.
She plans to move in the coming year.
I'm definitely going. I've decided we're going.
Still, she's not sure exactly where she'll go.
There's going to be a lot of work to be done no matter where that place is. So whether you stay or go, I think that the work is very similar that we all have to do in how we live independently and together.
All right, we'll start with Priya this time.
Yeah, I sort of have the same thoughts that I had the last time that I watched this. It was, from an editor's perspective, there was nothing really that was overwhelmingly gripping or stood out to me just in terms of like style and cadence. I really did like the way that they worked with some of the aerial shots I think we had talked about before and sort of the pacing of that. But otherwise, this wasn't like the strongest presentation, editing wise, just from my perspective.
O'Neill?
Yeah, I think I have to echo that a little bit. In terms of having like a thumbprint on like the editing of it, like I couldn't really tell if there is a certain style to this type of piece, or if it kind of is, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but it seems more very straightforward in its edit. It's simple, it's an effective, but did it stand out to me? I'm not sure it really did.
Raquel.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with both Priya and Nathan. Although the shots were beautiful, I feel like I've seen it many times. Like you kind of said, it is like that cookie cutter kind of, like I've seen the tone, the pace, kind of the imagery as well. But it's not bad. It's just, it didn't stand out to me like some of the other ones as far as editing goes.
And Mr. Thompson.
I mean, I thought that the opening was nice. It had some drama to it. I thought the ending was nice with the shot selection, you know, some pretty epic shots of the fires and, you know, some of the biggest moments that we all do kind of associate with climate crisis, fires and airplanes trying to fly in to save the day. That had some drama to it. You know, the graphics packages, they felt, you know, like a network graphics package. So it's, you know, they get the point across, which is great. But in terms of like establishing a style, they don't really, it doesn't feel custom to the piece or like tailored to it so much. Same thing with the lower thirds. I thought at the end, there seemed to be some of the shots, like there was one shot from San Francisco and then a drone shot, probably somewhere in California with a lot of smoke. The color treatment seemed like overly done in orange. I don't know, maybe that's what it really looked like, but it looked a little over stylized. So I thought that could have been just toned down a little bit. But yeah, in general, I preferred the style and the graphics in other pieces more.
Yes, thank you. So that is all the pieces in this category, which means we now have to rank them. There could be a first, second, third, or there should be a first, second, third. There can be also an honorable mention if we choose to award that or not. So let's go around the horn. You guys want to give your rankings and why? Nathan, we'll start with you. Thompson, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Real quick, could we see, do you have like a list where we could see all of the pieces at once so it's easier to kind of?
Yes.
I can just reshare if that's,
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Want me to go ahead?
Yes.
I got my picks. Okay, to me, Prone is the very clear winner, number one. The graphic style was beautiful. It was holistic and consistent all the way through. It made the other elements of the story so much more dramatic and just savory almost. That piece was absolutely outstanding. And then the content of it was just impressive as well. So Prone is my number one. Number two is Juneteenth for me. I liked, you know, I thought it's very different than Prone. It was quite busy. There was lots of texture and color and heavy graphics treatments. So it's nice that those were different, you know. I thought that really carried throughout the whole story and, you know, accented a lot of the historic graphics or the historic photos and things like that. It was very well done. And then I would do Chef versus O'Neill, Striving Towards Education Equality as number three. I thought it had nice music, nice pacing. It didn't make the top two because the ending lost a little energy. But overall, it was definitely a professional piece. You know, I think it was 55 minutes, which I'd like to mention. That's, you know, an incredibly ambitious undertaking. So, you know, to lose a little pacing at the end, you know, maybe I kind of understand that's a whole lot of work to put together an hour-long piece. So yeah, Prone, Juneteenth, Chef. And I don't think, I wouldn't pick an honorable mention in this category.
Okay. Let us go to Priya.
Yeah, I agree. For me, Prone was number one. you know, I'm looking at my notes here. The cadence of the editing was spot on. We had talked about sort of the style and the consistency of it from start to finish. And I mean, this was just overall a really smart investigative piece. And I think I mentioned, you know, when we were talking about this, that editing is one of like the top two components that really drives that home. It was almost like a pretty flawless piece. I don't think I had any like negative feedback or criticism at all about this. So that was number one. A very close second for me actually was Chef versus O'Neill. I think if it perhaps was a little shorter, it may have been even closer to number one for me. I just thought overwhelmingly it was a very clean piece, and I also really appreciated the cadence and the smart editing style of this one. Of course, we had talked about sort of the end and, you know, how that could have been tighter. It was quite a long piece, almost an hour long. So understand that. So of course, you know, the ending could have been better, but it really was a close second for me to Prone. And then number three would be Juneteenth. I really liked the graphics and animation forward bit of this. The stand-ups that we did talk about, not even like the Zoom part, but just like even the stand-ups at the beginning, I felt took away from the cadence of the editing. And just, it was almost like it was inserted there and it didn't really belong. And just sort of like the vocals over the stand-ups, I felt took away from the sort of cadence and pacing for me. But even the Juneteenth piece, the thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about it was the recording that was there of the formerly enslaved woman was like really powerful. And that was like a really powerful editing piece in that. But that was number three. And then the fourth would be the climate crisis series, just because to me, compared to the other ones, nothing really like stood out to me as overwhelmingly gripping or engaging. I think a few people mentioned that it was a little cookie cutter, and I think that's a good description for how I felt it was. So Prone number one, Chef versus O'Neill number two for me, then Juneteenth, and then climate.
Raquel.
Oh man, I'm torn on the second. The first, obviously, Prone. It was just tight. It was a tight edit. It was effective. It kept me engaged. It was just a clear number one for me throughout. I'm a little bit still tossing up between Juneteenth and Chef versus O'Neill. For the second, I really love like how Chef versus O'Neill was shot. It was also very clean. And the editing was also very clean. Juneteenth did feel like there was a lot going on, but it was also engaging to watch. And I liked the pace and I liked how it kept us moving forward and it didn't kind of linger and kind of plateau at any point. So I think I'm gonna have to go second with Juneteenth and third with Chef versus O'Neill because of that.
Would you do an honorable mention in this one or no?
No.
All right. And then Mr. O'Neill.
So my number one is Prone. I think it's one of those cases where less is more. The editing was simple and it really just enhanced the story, allowed the voices that were spoken to really hit and the video to really speak when it needed to. Number two for me was actually, it was very close between 2 and 3 for me as well. But I would probably have to go with Chef versus O'Neill, just because I felt, from a minimalistic approach, at least for me, I was drawn to the story a little bit more organically than I would say Juneteenth. Juneteenth, you could tell there was a lot of work and a lot of effort that went into the editing and the graphics and the production, and I appreciate that. But sometimes I felt there were moments when got a little busy for me, and it got a little bit too distracting to what I was supposed to be listening to as part of the story. So 2 for me would be Jeff versus O'Neill. 3 would be the Connecticut, or sorry, Juneteenth is for number 3. And then I would not put an honorable mention on this one.
All right. So we have a clear winner in prone for first place. We have a tie right now between second and third. We have 2 for Juneteenth in second, 2 for O'Neill in second, same for third. So would anyone like to switch their ranking? Because ideally we don't have ties. So anyone who is kind of going back and forth, would you like to go back and forth the other way?
I mean, I'll argue a little more for Juneteenth. Like Nate, I get your point about, I agree that sometimes less is more, but at the same time in the editing category, I do think it's worthwhile to put special notice on to where like if a lot of energy, went into something. And I feel like Juneteenth established more of a style with their graphics. And, like I remember on one of the murals, there was edits that like went to the music, and it just seemed like there was a lot of kind of special touches. When the former slave shared her story, there was like a special graphic that took that audio and made it visual, so I just feel like it was more heavy-handed, and I agree that it could be somewhat distracting, especially the opening was pretty heavy-handed, but at the same time for an editing category, I feel like there was more effort put into that. So anyways, that'd be my case if I were to make one.
And again, I'm trying to play Swiss here and to be a referee. I will reread this one portion of the rule. Higher weight will be given to documentaries with stellar editing and editing choices. An example, music, graphics, effects, and pacing that elevated the presentation without distracting from the story. So just within the rules, not trying to make one person's point or the other, just reading the rules. Anyone else like to offer?
Just from my perspective, I won't change my vote because for me, I felt that Chef versus O'Neill was like a pretty close second for me when it came to prone. And just as you were reading, that list, Ray, I just felt like Chef versus O'Neill had all of those things, and the editing really did elevate the project. So for me, I'm going to stick with Chef versus O'Neill for number 2.
Raquel, you were really just. Ugh.
I mean, I'm just listening because I can see all the different points. Like I did initially feel with Juneteenth at the beginning was like a little much. Like I kind of felt like I walked into like a paintball room and like didn't know we were paintballing, and I was like, oh man, here we go, let's go on this ride. But I understood that it's just like that's the style, and it grew on me over time. It became an entertaining factor to listening to a lot of information. Chef versus O'Neill was cleaner, I will say, but then I wonder how much of that actually attributed to that feeling of plateau that I got in the middle that didn't like kind of sustain me for as long. But there were like certain things with Juneteenth that like the inconsistent like lighting throughout, and like there were certain choices that now I'm kind of realizing, like having the anchor kind of sitting silently side by side with the woman who was actually speaking. And when those choices, when I think about that, like from an editing standpoint, like that shouldn't have been there in my opinion, because it distracted me. I might have to sway to Chef versus O'Neill.
Nathan O'Neill, you haven't provided a follow-up input, so I'll give you the opportunity.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
then
I'm kind
I'll
of
ask for
steadfast.
color.
I'm
Oh,
kind
go
of
ahead.
steadfast in my thinking. I mean, these are editing choices, right? So you can choose to put more effort into graphics or extra elements or not, and let the story speak for itself a little bit more. And I feel like Chef versus O'Neill may have capitalized on that a little bit more effectively, at least for me, than Juneteenth.
Okay. Back to Raquel. Would you like to lock in your final answer of
No.
of Chef versus O'Neill second, Juneteenth third, or?
All right, I'm gonna have to go with Chef versus O'Neill on the second and Juneteenth third.
So with that would make 3 votes for Chef versus O'Neill, putting it in second, 3 votes for Juneteenth in third, and a consensus of no honorable mention for climate. So one more time, prone first, Juneteenth, I'm sorry, Chef versus O'Neill second, Juneteenth third. Good discussion by all.